Two sisters have the same parents. They grow up in the same house. They go to the same schools and have many of the same life experiences. But this one becomes an addict and this one does not. Why? What makes addiction happen to others and others seem almost immune to it? What are the real causes of addiction? In this video, we're going to be breaking down 3 traits that doctors and practitioners almost never talk about, but they're present in every addiction that I've looked at. In 10 years that I have been off heroin, I have seen so many examples of these causing addiction and keeping people relapsing. There's a lot to go over. Let's get into it. My name's Aurora, and I take my formal education in psychology and my real life experience to give you an honest view of addiction, mental health, and grief. Now, I do want to talk about addiction a little bit before we get into the reasons, and that's because addiction looks very different than some people often think of. And the reason for this is society, right? Because some addictions are more socially acceptable than others. If I tell you I have a shopping addiction, we may laugh about that. If I say that I drink too much wine, well, there may be an Etsy sweater for me for Christmas time. But if I tell you that I snort an 8-ball of cocaine every week, then that's a much bigger conversation. And that may be different based on how it impacts our lives and others around us, but in our minds, it is the same. In our minds, addiction is addiction, whether it is sex addiction, shopping addiction, whether it's exercise addiction or heroin addiction. Our brains react the same way. And I'd like to go over that real quick, and just so we have a baseline understanding of how addiction actually works. Here's how it usually happens. We do something once, whether it's an experience or a substance, and our brain is so shocked by this experience that we've never done. It's invigorating and thrilling. We have a release of dopamine and serotonin, and all the feel-good chemicals are rushed through the pleasure sensors of our brain. And when that happens, afterwards we may go back to our lives, but we're remembering that high. So the situation presents itself again. Maybe you're at a party and it's a substance. Maybe it was a stressful situation and this is how you use to kind of cheer yourself up. However the case may be, you do it a second time. And this is what we call chasing the dragon, because your brain has already been primed for the experience or the substance. So you will never quite achieve that same experience again. So from the second time on, you remember those sisters from the beginning? Well, the first one is going to stop right here. The one that doesn't get addicted, she just stops at the second use. Maybe she uses it occasionally when there's a party recreationally. Maybe she never does it again. Maybe she does it once a year on New Year's. So the other sister that becomes an addict, when she goes back to her life after that second use, the next time that something troubling or especially exciting happens, she will remember how she handled that with the substance or the activity before. And she will find reasons to do this again. I remember I used to always look for reasons in the beginning to use. Either I was celebrating something or I was upset that something was happening and I was using it to kind of lick my wounds and make myself feel better. And in the end, I was using it just because it was a Wednesday. This is what happens when we start habitually doing it. And this is why some people call it a disease. This combination of events happens where our body stops producing these feel-good emotions unless we're doing this thing. Our brain rewires itself. Our central cortex stops handling arguments so well and stops being able to make decisions as acutely as it did before. And when we do this thing, our body gives us this sense of reward, like we're doing everything okay now, and we did it, we succeeded in getting high again. And this combination of feelings and events, welcome to addiction. What we want to find out, the whole point of this video isn't what happens to her from here on. What we are focusing on in this video is when it was habitual, when that first sister kept using and that second sister was able to never really pick it up in her daily life ever. What happened there? And that's where we come to our reasons for addiction. Reason number 1 is genetics. Now, we're going to start here because this is the most talked about of the reasons we'll mention. And even still, it is very rarely referenced by doctors or practitioners. The reason it's not talked about more is that there is no gene, no part of the DNA that says addict or not addict. And that's why they don't really talk about it so much, which I think is a huge oversight, because there are genes in DNA that can predict what it's going to be like. It gives us a predisposition. So there are genes that can make some people have hangovers and some people not. There are genes that can make the absorption of a certain substance more potent in this person than this person. Now, these sisters have the same basic genetic code, but unless they're identical twins, they will have variations in these genetics where one may be more dominant and one may be more recessive. We also have genetics that can make us more susceptible to mental illness. I'll use the example of weight loss and obesity. So there is no obese gene, right? There's no one gene in the DNA that's going to say this person is going to be obese for their whole life. But what there is a genetic for a slow or fast metabolism. That is not to say that someone with a slow metabolism can't do things necessary to maintain a healthy weight. And the same is true of addiction. The second cause of addiction, and this is a big one, is coping skills. Now, this is a very hot take, so I'm going to lean in here so that you don't miss this, because I will debate this forever. Addiction is a coping skill. Addiction is the coping skill that we reach for when we don't have any other coping skills that are working and we just can't get through. So what is a coping skill? Imagine food, right? They are like dietary preferences. We all have them. We all eat this food. And for the most part, the food that we eat in our lifetime will be based on the food that we were served and given as children, what our parents passed on, what we were shown when we were kids. And that's the same with coping skills, is how we saw the adults in our life coping with traumas, whether that was in healthy or unhealthy ways, is most likely how we were taught to cope. And if we're never taught more effective and healthy ways, depending on how much contrast and conflict is shoved into our lifetime, the more likely that those coping skills won't be enough, and we may reach for something like addiction. Now, here is the third cause of addiction, and this, for me, was the most monumental one of all: identity. We all have one. It's not a revelation. It's nothing new. But applying it to addiction, I never heard it done like this when I was trying to get clean and when I was in early sobriety. But think about it. So we have an identity, a sense of self, and based on the sense of self, we make decisions. Are we the type to go and protest? Are we the type to defend someone who might be being victimized in front of us? Everything that we are about is part of our identity, and it bases how we behave in our daily life. Every addict I have ever met, including myself, went through a time when they had labeled themselves as a screw up or a black sheep, a failure, and they didn't deserve good things. And so with that identity, how can you choose sobriety? How can you choose a life better for yourself? Often when people are trying to do interventions, they say, you deserve more than this. But the problem is that using addict doesn't believe that they deserve more. Their identity is that of someone who doesn't deserve more, who deserves to be punished, or who just doesn't deserve good things for some reason. Two identity shifts need to happen for lasting recovery. The shift that allows hope. You have to become someone who can hope for the future, who deserves better. And that's when people reach for recovery. That's when a rock bottom happens, is not only a trauma, a serious downshift has happened where things can't get worse, but At the same time, as things are getting so bad, you also have to have a shift where you believe that you can be someone who deserves better. And once that first identity shift happens, that's when recovery starts, usually. That's when people start trying to rebuild. But I don't know about you, but I had always heard these stories of people going to rehab 8 and 10, 12 times. And that's because they never finished that identity shift. After they got clean, not only were they probably not building healthy coping skills, but their identity never shifted from a person who is using. So as long as they were identifying as this screw up junkie who gets high and messes up their life, then that is what they're going to do. And it's not until they reinvent who they believe they are. You have to become someone who doesn't use drugs. You have to become someone who takes care of yourself. And that is where 12-step programs usually come in and help with lasting results. Now, there are plenty of ways to get and maintain sobriety. I'm not pushing 12 steps or denying them, but I am saying that they often are that piece that can help people find a new identity as someone who doesn't get high. They can go from an active using addict to a recovering addict. And that identity shift is so important. Now, if you are ready to shift your identity or want to know more about shifting identities and how that can affect your daily life and your mental health, then check out this video right here, and I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching, guys.